The dramatic southern tip of Africa. Just offshore, two very different seas meet to form one of the most diverse marine environments on Earth. The icy Atlantic and warm Indian Oceans, each with its distinctive characteristics, not only affect life underwater, they are giant contrasting forces that shape the land, climate, and all its creatures. This is the story of these two contrasting currents along the South African coast. Cape Point. When Portuguese explorer Bartholomew Dias and his anxious crew became the first Europeans to lay eyes on this part of the world in 1488, they called it the Cape of Storms. Later, it became the Cape of Good Hope, since it opened the route from Portugal to India. English sea captain Sir Francis Drake was so impressed by the beauty of this coast that he described it as the fairest cape in the entire circumference of the earth. To this day, the peninsula's unique charisma continues to captivate visitors. Following advances in their field, marine scientists now recognize Cape Point as a landmark shift in the marine environment from the west to east. This unique landmark is telling us something new on a much larger scale than ever before. Southern Africa is unique. Satellite images reveal unmistakable contrasts on land. The eastern and southern verdant green, while the central and western parts are arid and barren. On the east coast, the landscape is lush and moist. This part of South Africa is semi-tropical, with rivers and wetlands rich in flora and fauna. Here, coastal dune forests run for hundreds of kilometers, and we find mangrove forest on the estuaries. Underwater, coral reefs form a hub of diverse, colorful marine life. At exactly the same latitude, but on the west coast, the contrast could not be more radical. This part of southern Africa is barren and semi-arid, with very few rivers. Here we find the oldest desert in the world, the Namib, and further inland, the dry savanna and dunes of the Kalahari. The mountain desert of the Richtersveld and the succulent so typical of Namaqualand and the Karoo. Fresh water is scarce for most of the year. The main source of moisture is coastal fog. On the west side of southern Africa, the Orange River forms a linear oasis, ending in the Atlantic Ocean after a journey of 2,000 kilometers. The river has its origins in mountain highlands to the east, where summer rainfall is good. This means it swells at the time of the year when the west coast is desperately dry and hot. Apart from this unique oasis, most of the west coast is arid. Why is there such a dramatic contrast in the east and west coasts of southern Africa? The answer lies in the two very different oceans. When the satellite image reads ocean surface temperatures, it reveals the two main currents that flow along the southern African coastline. On the east side of the continent, a warm flow of water moves fast from the Mozambique Channel, heading south. This is the intense Agulhas current, about 100 kilometers wide, with surface water speeds of up to 2 meters per second. Further south, this warm current deflects and dissipates, moving northwestward into the South Atlantic Ocean. On the west side of the continent, From Cape Town to southern Angola, the sea temperature is exceptionally cold. This forms the more sluggish Benguela Current, which moves slowly northwards at a speed of 10 to 30 centimeters per second. But a closer look reveals a narrow band of extremely cold water all along the west coast. This is thanks to strong winds that drive a massive upwelling of deep cold waters to the surface. Upwelling occurs when the southeasterly wind blows along the west coast and, together with the rotation of the Earth, displaces the coastal surface water westwards, causing deep, cold water to surge. Upwellings bring deep, nutrient-rich water to the surface. On the west coast of Africa, this phenomenon takes place at a rate of 30 meters a day, by far the largest recorded upwelling in the world. When the icy water reaches the surface of the ocean, it triggers a giant bloom of microscopic algae. The production of microscopic algae sustains a large food web, from small fish like sardines to the many predators that follow them. This intense upwelling drives the food chain on the west coast and allows marine life in huge numbers. Fishermen, too, capitalize on the large number of fish that follows the sardine spree. Early morning near Cape Point. This is a well-known spot to catch the voracious snook, which looks rather like a slender barracuda. As the fish follow sardines into the bay, the fishermen spring to action. With so many lines in the water, it can become messy on board when the fish strike. In the end, they return to the harbor, pleased with their catch. The upwelling creates nutrient-rich water, but it comes at a price. Cold water releases very little moisture into the air, making the land along this coast hot and thirsty. Most of the fresh water here comes in the form of fog. Since upwelling is driven by winds and the wind strength is not uniform from one day to another, ocean temperatures can vary unpredictably. The creatures that live here have to be resilient to survive their ever-changing environment. Those that live here can make it in large numbers. The west coast is home to the largest South African fur seal colonies. Here at Kleinsee, nearly 400,000 seals gather each year to breed. These are well-insulated marine mammals that can survive the cold waters. But unlike dolphins and whales, they're still dependent on land to breed. Males defend their territory to form harems of female seals. Females will mate again just 10 days after giving birth. This maximizes their time in the colony and ensures pregnancy for next year. This newborn pup is fragile and with dark fur. It's a dangerous time for the newborn. Excessive heat and a lack of food can easily end its life. Mother seals dedicate all their energy to feeding their single pup for 8 to 12 months. Every day, they venture into the sea to feed, returning with nutritious milk. At this age, a pup without a mother faces certain death. Seal colonies along the Benguela Current are prime hunting grounds for sharks, which visit regularly in search of unwary and naive juveniles. Playing underwater is vital training for escaping fast-swimming sharks. Even if a seal escapes an attack, its wounds may be too severe to survive. But in this harsh coast, nothing is wasted. The Cove Benguela is home to an abundance of sardines and anchovies, which make up the diet of coastal birds. These birds have their main breeding colonies on offshore islands. Cape gannets breed exclusively on these offshore islands. This is one such colony in Lambert's Bay, on an island connected to land but closely monitored for land predators. In the West Coast National Park, another Cape gannet colony lives on the granite island of Malgas. But by far the largest colony of Cape gannets lives on Bird Island in Algoa Bay near Port Elizabeth. This is the largest Cape gannet colony in the world. (160,000 strong. A deafening feathered airport with a magnificent lighthouse as a control tower. Every year, breeding season comes to these few densely packed island colonies. Birds time their breeding to coincide with a peak of upwelling, which means more food for the chicks. These elegant birds raise only one chick at a time, a job shared equally by the parents. Breeding is highly ritualized. There's fencing on arrival to ensure pair recognition. Slow motion movements and sky pointing to advertise the shift in nesting duties. The chicks are fed with the best available marine protein, sardines and anchovies. It takes around 140 days of hard work for the parents to raise their chick from an egg to a fledgling. Parents take turns and travel hundreds of kilometers in search of sardines. By the time the young bird is ready to leave the nest, it's heavier than its parents. But there'll be no more free meals. It's time to face the ocean alone. The young brown bird will take about 3 years to develop its handsome adult plumage. If the gannet is a handsome bird, the African penguin is the best-dressed diver in Africa. This is the only species of penguin on the African continent, and its presence is closely tied to the cold Benguela Current. The largest colony of African penguins is found not far from Bird Island, on the small island of St. Croix. Unlike Cape gannets, penguins are flightless. Their movements are far more restricted to their breeding grounds. African penguins breed between March and May and usually lay only 1 or 2 eggs. They can dive as deep as 130 meters and stay underwater for up to 5 minutes while foraging. These birds need to swim considerable distances to find food and bring it back to feed their chicks. The abundance of life in the Benguela also attracts commercial attention. Both the African penguin and the Cape gannet have managed to survive the massive human exploitation of the past. Guano and egg collection very nearly eliminated these birds from our coast. Between 1900 and 1930, millions of eggs were removed, mostly from Dusson Island, one of the penguin's main breeding islands. Egg collecting was finally banned in 1969, but by that time the African penguin population had taken a huge blow. Today, old photographs of Dusson Island give us a glimpse of what this colony was like in the early 1900s. The early 1840s saw the start of the guano rush, when an enormous quantity of bird droppings or guano was collected, mainly as a valuable fertilizer. Thick layers of guano had accumulated on these islands over thousands of years, but it was stripped to bare rock in just a couple of decades. In the process, the African penguin lost its main nesting grounds. The spongy guano was ideal for building breeding burrows, which shelter them from heat and rain. Due to the heavy exploitation of their eggs, the African penguin became extinct on South Africa's most famous island, Robben Island, as early as 1620. They were later reintroduced, but it took 200 years to re-establish a sizable colony. Today, South Africa's offshore islands are protected and their feathered inhabitants no longer disturbed while breeding. But the African penguin population is still in serious trouble as their numbers continue to drop for reasons that are not entirely clear. The number of African penguins breeding in southern Africa has recently dropped from about 56,000 pairs to 21,000 pairs, a loss of more than 60% in 8 years. Today, the global population of the African penguin is only 26,000 pairs. There is strong evidence to suggest that overfishing along the Benguela has depleted pilchards and anchovy populations, the penguin and gannet's main food source. The birds have responded by moving up the south coast, where pilchards are still available. But for penguins, it's an enormous distance to cover, and there are no alternative islands to breed and molt closer to their food. The historical threats of egg and guano harvesting have been replaced by direct competition for food with commercial fishing boats. It's now clear that the conservation of these birds depends on the protection not only of their breeding islands, but also of their main food sources. Despite the immense productivity, the rich Benguela is a fragile environment, and the birds are giving the warning signs. Along this coast, giant seaweeds thrive in the cold, nutrient-rich Benguela Current. Massive kelp forests, closely associated with upwelling, line the rocky sea floor. A kind of massive algae, these constantly moving plants create a shady underwater world, sheltering great diversity under their canopy. Some of these species are found only here. The kelp limpet is adapted to live only along the stipe of the kelp, grazing its cylindrical territory. This is the sea bamboo, the largest kelp in Africa. Its hollow gas-filled stipe expands at the top to form a floating bulb, which holds the strap-shaped fronds at the surface to capture sunlight. It is both the largest and one of the fastest growing algae, increasing by as much as 13 millimeters a day and reaching up to 12 meters in length. Each plant has a sturdy, root-like holdfast attached to the rocky substrate. These forests are among the most productive in the world, exceeding the yield of most agricultural land. Each kelp frond will produce about 6 times its own mass in detritus each year, feeding the adjacent oceans and shores. In this forest swims a primitive creature, a glimpse of what the shark's ancestors may have looked like. Not much is known about the cow shark, which, unlike most shark species, has 7 gills. Its diet differs little from that of the great white and includes seals. Bite marks along the flanks mean it's mating season in the forest. Kelp forests are the backbone of the entire coastal ecosystem along the Benguela. The constant movement of the waves gradually breaks down the plant, sustaining filter feeders and grazers along the shore. Stormy seas deposit huge piles of the floating plants onto the rocks and beaches, fueling the life of many marine organisms. A pile of drift kelp is closely scrutinized by a troop of chacma baboons. There may be some succulent treasures here. It's a good time to learn for the youngster. They search on the holdfast of the kelp, looking for large ribbed mussels, a welcome gift from the depths. But limpets are the undisputed kings of the Benguela. Along this coast, there are so many that they hold the world record for the highest amount of marine flesh per unit area of rock. Some limpets trap live kelp by clipping nearby fronds with their serrated shells. As the tide exposes the lower parts of the shore, more succulent shellfish become available. This is perfect timing. A pregnant female baboon pays a short visit to the shore. She's an expert at dislodging limpets from rocks. Not an easy task. She searches for the right size of limpet. The first bite must be done before the limpet clings tightly to the rock. If the element of surprise fails, the baboon moves on to the next one, until she gets the nutritious reward. If she cannot dislodge the limpet from the rock, biting the top off also does the trick. For this mother, that's enough protein for the day. Other predators are less conspicuous on the rocky shore. A spiny starfish moves slowly, like an armored monster, using its complex hydraulic system to put its numerous tubular feet into motion. There's nowhere to run for this winkle. And the starfish will have its meal. The west and south coasts are notoriously unpredictable, and many wrecks along the shore testify to the fury of huge winter swells, which even shake up the kelp forests. But for some migratory giants, these conditions are serene compared to the storms they must endure in the open southern oceans. Every year from June to November, southern right whales return to the southern tip of Africa to breed. These are the whales' main calving and mating grounds. These giants depend on their fat reserves accumulated in the southern oceans to complete their breeding duties. With a layer of blubber 35 centimeters thick, adult whales are well insulated against the cold water. A heavily pregnant female who's been carrying a single calf in her womb for 12 months has come to these shores to give birth. When born, the calf drank over 500 liters of fatty milk daily, growing at a rate of nearly 3 centimeters per day. Since they're born with no blubber, they need to deposit fat quickly if they're to endure the return trip with their mothers to the southern oceans by the end of November. "50% of all southern right whale calves born in Africa each year are born in the marine protected area of De Hoop. Mother and calf are safe here, and there's plenty of time to play and socialize. Unlike the African penguins, Southern right whales are recovering from human exploitation, the massive whaling operations of the past. Their growing numbers represent one of the most successful conservation stories of this century. Between 1770 and 1850, an estimated 150,000 southern right whales were slaughtered, mostly by whalers in rowing boats with handmade harpoons. It was only in 1935 that the southern right whale was given international protection. At that time, their numbers were estimated at a meager 300 individuals. Southern rights now double their numbers every 10 years. Today, it's estimated that around 7,000 whales swim freely between the Southern Oceans and the South African coast. People come from all over the world to see the spectacle of the whales returning. Along the south coast, more rivers enter the sea, forming magnificent estuaries. This is the Neisner Estuary, and underwater there's a delicate creature, the Neisner seahorse. A small fish version of the chameleon, with eyes that can swivel independently and a prehensile tail to hold on to seagrass. Unlike other fish, the male gives birth to offspring after the female has transferred her eggs into his special ventral pouch. Moving away from the cold waters of the southern right whale and the fragile seahorse, the landscape starts to change. This is the realm of the Agulhas Current, a flow of warm water moving south. The effects of the cold Benguela Current can be felt all the way to Port Elizabeth. But from here to the north, the warm Agulhas Current hugs the entire east coast and affects the landscape dramatically. Here, the abundant moisture creates rolling green hills, which are now mostly grassland thanks to deforestation by fire and the introduction of cattle. The remaining forest is still visible as patches over the ancient coastal dunes. With its striking contrasts and strong winds, this is a place of distinctive natural beauty. The Wild Coast, where legends tell of sea people who used a giant fish to break a hole in the wall to free a beautiful local girl. This is one of the few places on Earth where waterfalls tumble into the ocean. Along the warm Agulhas coast, the vegetation is more tropical. Unlike the floating kelp forests of the cold ocean, here true forests extend through the mud flats of the river mouth. These are mangrove trees, adapted to live in salty water. Their roots are buried into the mud, but they have special breathing roots that stick out of the mud that allow the tree to breathe when the mud flat is exposed at low tide. Just as the kelp forest is vital to many forms of life in the cold waters of the Benguela Current, so the mangrove forests play an important role along this warm coast. The lush trees near the river mouth create a sediment trap. Their leaves and fruit generate large quantities of food for the creatures that live beneath their canopy. But perhaps more striking still is the direct link between these trees and the ocean. Many species of reef fish and crustaceans move in and out of the estuary with the tides. For many of them, the complex matrix of mangroves is a refuge for breeding and a nursery. Closer to the border of Mozambique, the heart of the warm Agulhas creates a lush and semi-tropical terrain. The fauna and flora here are so diverse that this became South Africa's first World Heritage Site in 1999. Today, it is known as the Isimangaliso Wetland Park, a real conservation gem. There's no park on the planet quite like it. 332,000 hectares containing 3 major lake systems and 8 interlinking ecosystems. It's home to Africa's largest estuarine system and includes 25,000-year-old coastal forest dunes, some of the highest in the world. Nelson Mandela once said of this stretch of coast, "Isimangaliso must be the only place on the globe where the oldest land mammal, the rhinoceros, and the world's biggest terrestrial mammal, the elephant, share an ecosystem with the world's oldest fish, the coelacanth, and the world's biggest marine mammal, the whale." From the air, it's easy to see what he meant. The uninterrupted connection between land and sea is what makes it possible for so many animals to share this area. The massive lakes are paradise for water-loving species. While stretches of savanna with nutritious grasses support abundant game. Towards the sea, a massive forested dune runs parallel to the coast for hundreds of kilometers. These dune forests are rich in animals and plants, some of which are found nowhere else. And just below the forest, long sandy beaches slope gently down to the sea, forming among the most important breeding sites for marine turtles. The dunes are also collectors of moisture, which runs down into the adjacent lakes and savanna. The park's extensive lakes and rivers open up into the sea. The rich coral reefs and mangroves link to the estuary, with many species moving in and out to sea with the tides. The Tembe Tonga people know these estuaries well. For hundreds of years, they have used an intricate network of fish traps, taking advantage of the natural cycle of the tides. Palisades guide the fish to the final retention ring, where they become trapped, to be speared at low tide. It's a sustainable way of fishing, since juvenile fish escape through gaps in the palisades, grow to adulthood, and reproduce. This fishing tradition is passed to the next generation, and the park protects this ancient method of fishing, giving us a glimpse of how people lived and fished along these estuaries for hundreds of years. The warmer waters of the Agulhas not only create a semi-tropical paradise on land, but underwater too. This is the southernmost distribution of coral reef. No fewer than 100 species of coral occur here. The photosynthetic activities of the symbiotic algae found in hard corals help to deposit the skeleton that built the reef. As the reef grows, it forms a kind of bustling underwater city, full of potential living space. In deeper waters, the light fades and fewer coral species thrive in the colder, darker conditions. At a depth of more than 100 meters, there's no light. Intricate rocky outcrops form caves inhabited by the world's oldest fish. The coelacanth belongs to a group of fish found in fossil deposits about 380 million years old, which were presumed to have become extinct before the dinosaurs. But incredibly, this species still survives in the dark depths of this park, and today they are not only protected, but also are part of a research project to find out more about these living fossils. Another creature visits the long sandy beaches bordering the warm Agulhas Current. These pristine beaches are one of the last refuges in Africa for marine turtles to breed safely. Every year, they gather here to mate in the shallow waters. The females then crawl up to the dunes to nest on the sand. For females, this is the only time that they return to their birthplace. Pheromones in the sand guide the female turtle to this coast. These natural chemicals have been accumulating in the sand over thousands of years of breeding seasons. This is the leatherback turtle, a giant marine reptile. It grows up to nearly 2 meters long and can weigh close to 1 ton. This turtle grows quickly, and its impressive size helps it to maintain a constant core body temperature, making it possible to swim as far as the cold waters of the Benguela Current. Since this coast has been protected, their numbers have slowly increased. This turtle is critically endangered, facing a very high risk of extinction in the wild. This last piece of untouched coast is the key to their survival. Each egg contains the hope of their continued existence in these oceans. Leatherback turtles can lay up to 1,000 eggs in a breeding season, in clutches of about 100 at a time. Every 10 days, females return to the beach at night to lay their eggs. The survival rate of the hatchlings is very low, but the young females that survive will one day come back here to breed once they have reached maturity at between 5 to 10 years of age. Marine turtles are one of the greatest wanderers of the world's oceans, traveling many thousands of kilometers before returning again to the breeding beaches. Isimangaliso's warm waters are a meeting place for yet another giant, the spotted ragged-toothed shark. Scientists believe that they gather here for courtship and mating. Unlike other sharks, the ragged-tooth pumps water through its gills, and it can remain motionless for long periods of time. It's also able to control its buoyancy by gulping air from the surface. Despite its fierce appearance, the ragged-tooth is not dangerous to humans, and its teeth are adapted for grasping and swallowing small morsels rather than for cutting pieces from large prey. These sharks migrate seasonally. They mate here in summer and 9 to 12 months later give birth to 2 pups. The females produce many eggs, but only 2 embryos survive. At only 10 centimeters, the 2 pups have functional teeth and begin to feed on eggs and smaller siblings for sustenance, a kind of cannibalism that's unique to this shark. When the pups reach about 1 meter in size, they are ready to be born, and by that time the mother would have moved south to give birth. Along the warm Agulhas Current, there's a unique marine protected area known for its sharks. This is Aliwal Shoal, and when waters are warm, there's a good chance you'll see one of the largest predators of the ocean, the tiger shark. An enigmatic creature with a gentle personality and powerful jaws. It's the only shark that's able to crush the hard carapace of marine turtles. In fact, there's good reason to believe that the armored plates of sea turtles have evolved as protection from such predators. Most of the tiger sharks that visit this coast are large females. They come when the water is warm, clear, and calm. Scientists are investigating why these large females are regular visitors to this stretch of coast. What they do know is that tiger sharks make frequent and dramatic dives of up to 800 meters and are capable of hunting in colder waters too. This marine protected area is changing perceptions of tiger sharks. Long-term knowledge of each tiger shark that visits these waters makes it possible for people to admire them at close range. Shark tourism helps to break down the common belief that tiger sharks are ferocious man-eaters. Here, the expert's knowledge of shark behavior provides the opportunity for any visitor to turn fear into admiration and respect for one of the most impressive creatures of the ocean. The warm and cold oceans that border southern Africa are contrasting corridors of life. Along the west coast, the cold Benguela Current creates a semi-desert environment on land. Coastal winds set in motion a rich marine world. It's the realm of kelp forests, seals, and endemic marine birds. Along the east coast, the warm Agulhas Current releases plenty of moisture and creates a lush green world on land. This is the realm of coral reefs and mangrove swamps, sharks, and fascinating marine giants that gather seasonally to breed. Together, these two oceans of Africa are home to one of the most diverse marine environments found on our blue planet. These two contrasting oceans are among the most powerful natural forces in Africa. The cold and warm oceanic currents interact directly with the atmosphere, regulating the amount of rainfall on land, and so shaping the landscape of southern Africa and the lives of every living creature.